The dinner table was silent, but not the kind of peaceful silence that comes with comfort. No, this was heavy, thick with words unsaid and emotions barely contained. I pushed my fork around the plate, more focused on keeping my composure than eating. Phil sat across from me, his eyes darting from his untouched meal to me. I could feel the tension radiating from him like static electricity, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he broke the silence. So, he began, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. "You've been spending a lot of time with Kelvin lately." There it was. The question I'd been waiting for all week. I looked up at him, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Yes, I have. He's my best friend, Phil. You know that." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Your best friend? Right? You mean the guy you've been running off to see every other week? The one you spend hours with while I'm sitting here like some fool?" His tone was sharper now, cutting deeper than I cared to admit. I put my fork down and folded my hands in front of me, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Kelvin's going through a rough time. I'm just being there for him. You know how important he is to me." Phil let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Important enough to leave your husband alone every time he calls? Important enough to make plans to stay the night? Tell me, Maya, when did he become more important than us?" I froze. I hadn't even told him yet, and he already knew. "I'm going to Kelvin's place tonight," I said carefully, as if the words were fragile. "And yes, I might stay over if it gets late." You what?" Phil's voice rose, startling me. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the dishes clatter. "You're really telling me you're going to stay the night at another man's house? Are you serious, Maya?" The anger in his voice made my stomach twist, but I held my ground. "He's not just another man, Phil. He's Kelvin. He's practically family. Why are you making this into something it's not?" "Because it is something," he shouted, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "You're crossing a line, Maya. And if you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. I mean it. I'll file for divorce." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Divorce? Over this?" I stared at him, his face flushed with anger and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. My heart was pounding, my emotions teetering between hurt and fury. "You're being ridiculous, Phil," I said, standing up to face him. "This is about your insecurity, not me. Kelvin has been in my life long before you came along, and if you can't deal with that, maybe we need to reevaluate this marriage." Phil didn't respond. His jaw was set, his eyes burning with frustration and something else, pain, maybe. But I didn't stick around to figure it out. I grabbed my keys and my coat, ignoring the sound of him calling my name as I walked out the door. My hands were trembling as I started the car, but I forced myself to focus. The cool night air rushed through the cracked window, but it did little to calm the storm in my chest. The farther I drove, the more the weight of it all started to press down on me. Phil's anger, his ultimatum, his accusations, they all swirled in my mind like a tornado. But beneath it all was something darker. Guilt. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white as I whispered to myself, "I can't keep this secret forever." The words hung in the air, heavier than anything Phil had said. And I knew they were true. Kelvin's house always felt like stepping into a time capsule. The familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint musk of old books hit me as soon as I walked through the door. It was warm, inviting, everything my house with Phil hadn't been lately. Kelvin greeted me with his usual easy smile, a comfort I hadn't realized I needed until that moment. He stood in the doorway, arms open for a hug. Hey, trouble, he said, his tone light but concerned. Rough night? I let out a shaky breath and melted into the hug. You could say that. He guided me inside, and we settled into the worn, overstuffed couch in his living room. The soft glow of the table lamp bathed the room in a warm light, contrasting sharply with the icy confrontation I had just left behind. Kelvin handed me a mug of tea, something he always did when I showed up unannounced. So, he said, sitting across from me, his elbows resting on his knees. What happened this time? I sighed, staring into the swirling steam of the tea. Phil lost it. Again. He thinks I'm choosing you over him. Kelvin raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. He had a way of listening that made you want to spill everything, no matter how messy. I told him I was coming here tonight. Maybe staying over. And my voice faltered as I thought about Phil's ultimatum. He threatened to file for divorce if I left. Kelvin leaned back, his expression a mix of concern and exasperation. Maya, you know I'll always have your back, but you've got to talk to him. Really talk to him. This isn't sustainable. I shook my head, the weight of everything pressing down on me. You don't understand. It's not just about Phil being jealous. It's what I'm not telling him. What I've been hiding for years. Kelvin's gaze softened, and I knew what was coming before he even said it. Maya, you can't keep Lila a secret forever. Phil deserves to know. My chest tightened at the sound of her name, Lila, my daughter. Our daughter. I know, I whispered, my voice barely audible. But how do I tell him? How do I explain that I have a 7-year-old daughter with you? That I kept it from him for our entire marriage? He'll never forgive me, Kelvin. Kelvin sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You don't give him enough credit, Maya. Yeah, he's going to be angry, probably for a long time. But isn't that better than him finding out on his own? Or worse, feeling like your entire marriage is built on lies? Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I didn't keep her a secret to hurt him, I said, my voice cracking. I wanted a fresh start. And when I met Phil, it was like I could finally breathe again. I didn't want my past, our past, to ruin that. Kelvin reached over, placing a reassuring hand on mine. I get it, Maya. I really do. But Lila deserves to know Phil, and Phil deserves the truth. You've got to stop running from this. I nodded, even though the thought of coming clean to Phil felt like stepping off a cliff. As Kelvin started talking about ways I could break the news, I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to Phil. His anger, his hurt. The way his voice cracked when he said the word divorce. I had no idea he was at home, scrolling through my old social media photos. Phil sat at the dining table, the remnants of their tense dinner still scattered in front of him. He stared at his phone, scrolling through Maya's Facebook photos, a habit he hadn't indulged in for years. And then he saw it. It was an old picture, one he had never noticed before. Maya, Kelvin, and a little girl with curly hair and a wide smile, standing in front of a park fountain. The caption read, Family Day. Phil's breath caught, and his heart raced. Who the hell is this kid? He muttered, zooming in on the photo. His mind spun with questions, doubts, and a growing anger that burned hotter with every passing second. As I leaned back on Kelvin's couch, my hands trembling around the mug of tea, I felt a storm brewing, not just with Phil, but within me. The guilt I'd buried for so long was clawing its way to the surface. I could feel the walls of my carefully constructed life closing in. Kelvin gave me a small, encouraging smile. You'll figure it out, Maya. You always do. But as I sat there, staring at the clock ticking away on the wall, I wasn't so sure anymore. I didn't know it then, but as I sat with Kelvin, wrestling with the weight of my secrets, Phil was unraveling. When Phil and I met, he always said he loved how transparent I seemed, like an open book he couldn't wait to keep reading. But over the years, I'd caught glimpses of something darker beneath his calm exterior, a quiet insecurity, a need to know everything about me. Maybe it was because his first marriage had ended in betrayal. Or maybe it was something deeper, something I couldn't fix, no matter how hard I tried. That night, after I stormed out, Phil's mind went into overdrive. Sitting in the dimly lit living room, Phil stared at the old photo he'd found, his hands trembling. The little girl in the picture, her face was hauntingly familiar. She looked just like Maya. But Maya had never mentioned a child. Not once. He pulled up her social media accounts, combing through years of posts and photos. Most of them were innocuous, smiling selfies, pictures of vacations, and shots of the two of us looking happy. But then there were the gaps. Entire years where she'd barely posted anything at all. That was when he started digging deeper. Old messages, saved emails, anything that might give him a clue. And then he found it. An email from years ago, before we were married. The subject line read, "Lila's first day of school." Attached was a photo of the same little girl, her tiny hands clutching a backpack, almost too big for her. The email was from Kelvin. Phil's stomach dropped. Kelvin was pacing in the kitchen, a habit he'd picked up whenever he was trying to work through a problem. "So, when are you going to tell him?" he asked, his voice firm but kind. I sighed, running my fingers through my hair. "I don't know. Maybe after the holidays." Kelvin stopped pacing and gave me a look. "Maya, you've been saying after the holidays for years. It's not going to get any easier." I knew he was right. But the thought of Phil's reaction made my stomach churn. Phil loved structure, certainty. He liked things to be neat, logical, planned. Telling him I had a child with another man before we even met. That wasn't just going to rock the boat, it was going to sink it. Kelvin leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You're scared he's going to leave you." I looked up at him, tears stinging my eyes. "Aren't you?" I shot back. "If the roles were reversed, if someone dropped this bombshell on you, wouldn't you?" Kelvin hesitated, his gaze softening. "Maybe. But I'd rather know the truth than live a lie." I turned away, staring out the window. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting shadows across the room. Kelvin was right, of course. He usually was. But knowing the right thing to do and actually doing it were two entirely different battles. Phil couldn't sleep. The pieces weren't fitting together fast enough, and the uncertainty was eating him alive. Who was Lila? Why hadn't Maya ever mentioned her? And why the hell was Kelvin in every single photo that involved the little girl? He clenched his fists, his mind replaying old arguments between him and Maya. There was the time I'd missed an anniversary dinner, because I stopped by Kelvin's to help him with something. Phil hadn't spoken to me for days afterward. And there were the little comments, the subtle digs about how much time I spent with Kelvin, as if my loyalty was constantly in question. For years, I'd written it off as jealousy. Now, I wondered if maybe he'd been right to worry. Phil didn't even realize he'd grabbed his car keys until he was already halfway out the door. His chest felt tight, his breath shallow as he climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The photo, the email, the unanswered questions, they all swirled together in his mind, forming a storm he couldn't contain. He needed answers, and he needed them now. As he sped down the empty streets toward Kelvin's house, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, one thought consumed him: Maya lied to me. Kelvin and I were sitting on the couch again, the silence between us stretching longer than I was comfortable with. I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting for me to say something. "I'll tell him," I said finally, more to myself than to Kelvin. "I just need to find the right moment." Kelvin didn't respond right away, and when he did, his voice was low, almost hesitant. "Maya, sometimes there is no right moment. You just have to rip the band-aid off." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the doorbell rang. Kelvin and I exchanged a look. It was nearly midnight, too late for a casual visitor. As Kelvin got up to answer the door, my heart started pounding. I didn't know why, but something about the sudden interruption felt off. And then I heard his voice. "Maya." Phil was here. When the door swung open, I saw Phil standing there, his face shadowed by something darker than anger. It was betrayal. He didn't even glance at Kelvin. His eyes were locked on me, burning with accusations that I wasn't sure I had the strength to refute. "Maya," he said, his voice low and sharp like the edge of a knife. "You've been lying to me this whole time." I froze, every nerve in my body on edge. Kelvin stood between us, his hands raised slightly, as if trying to defuse an invisible bomb. "Phil," Kelvin said carefully. "It's late. Let's all just calm down, Anne. Don't tell me to calm down." Phil barked, his voice echoing through the house. His gaze shifted to Kelvin, and his lips curled into a bitter sneer. "How long has this been going on?" "Huh? The late-night visits, the secrets. Are you two laughing at me behind my back?" I stepped forward, my heart racing. "Phil, stop. It's not what you think." He turned to me, his face twisted with disbelief. "Then what is it, Maya?" "Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell looks like you've been carrying on with him this entire marriage." The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Kelvin took a step back, sensing that this wasn't his moment to intervene. I swallowed hard, my voice trembling. "Phil, please, just let me explain." "Explain what?" he spat. "That you've been running to him every time we have a fight. That you're spending the night here while I sit at home wondering what the hell is going on." I couldn't hold it in any longer. The weight of the secret, the years of hiding, the guilt, it all came crashing down at once. "Lila," I said, my voice breaking. "She's not just any child. She's my daughter. My daughter with Kelvin." The room fell into a stunned silence. For a moment, I thought Phil hadn't heard me. But then his face changed, first confusion, then shock, and finally a deep, cutting hurt. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Tears streamed down my face as I continued. "It was before I met you. I was young, scared, and not ready to be a mother. My mom has been raising her, and I thought it was easier this way. To keep it separate from us." Phil took a step back, shaking his head. "You thought it was easier? Easier to lie to me for years? To pretend you didn't have a child? Maya, how could you do this?" Kelvin stepped in then, his voice calm but firm. "Phil, listen. This isn't what you think. Maya and I, there's nothing romantic between us. We've been co-parenting, trying to do what's best for Lila without disrupting her life." Phil let out a bitter laugh. "Co-parenting? That's rich. You've been lying to me this whole time, and now you expect me to just accept this." "I wanted to tell you," I said, my voice cracking. "I was scared, Phil. Scared of how you'd react, scared of losing you." "Well, congratulations," he said coldly. "You just lost me anyway." He turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound reverberated through the house, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. I sank to the floor, my body trembling with sobs. All the walls I'd carefully built around my secret had come crashing down, and now I was left with nothing but the wreckage. Kelvin knelt beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "Maya," he said softly, "what are you going to do now?" I looked up at him through tear-streaked eyes, my mind a swirling mess of guilt, fear, and uncertainty. "I don't know," I whispered. The front door creaked open, the silence of the house swallowing me whole. I stepped inside, every inch of me heavy with the weight of the evening's chaos. The house felt colder without Phil's presence, the warmth I'd once felt in our shared spaces now replaced by an aching emptiness. On the kitchen counter, a note lay in front of me, scribbled in Phil's handwriting. My heart dropped as I read it. "I need space. I can't do this right now. I'll be back when I'm ready to talk." It was simple, to the point. It told me everything I needed to know. Phil had left. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, he was gone. I crumpled the note in my hands, my throat tight with unshed tears. I had never imagined things would spiral this far, that the truth would unravel everything I had worked so hard to build. I paced the living room, every step echoing the same question in my mind: what now? The hours dragged on as I sat in the quiet, waiting for something, anything, to change. But all I could hear was the memory of Phil's voice, laced with hurt, disappointment, anger. His words haunted me, replaying over and over again. Phil had always been so certain, so strong. But now, I knew, he wasn't the only one in this marriage bearing a weight. I could feel his struggle, his doubts, the way his love for me was battling against his feelings of betrayal. I remembered the moments we'd shared over the years, the little arguments that had seemed insignificant at the time. The times when he'd gotten quiet, his eyes distant. There had always been something. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I remembered the first time he'd asked about Kelvin. "Why do you still see him so often, Maya?" he'd asked, his voice tight, like he was trying to hold back his frustrations. "I told you, he's my best friend," I'd answered quickly, but even I could hear the edge in my voice. The truth was, Kelvin and I had always shared a bond that went deeper than friendship, a bond that Phil had never truly understood. And I hadn't been brave enough to explain it. Another memory surfaced, one from a few months ago, after I'd spent a late night at Kelvin's. Phil had waited up for me. "Where were you?" he demanded, his face pinched with worry. "I was with Kelvin," I'd said, almost defensively. "You always say you're just with him, but I don't know anymore, Maya. I don't know if I can trust you." At the time, I'd brushed it off. But now, I realized how deep his insecurities had run, how much he had questioned the foundation of our relationship, even before tonight. In a daze, I grabbed my keys and drove to my mother's house. I needed to see Laya. I needed to hold her, feel her small arms wrapped around me, to remind myself that in the midst of this mess, there was still something pure. When I arrived, my mom was in the kitchen, a warm smile spreading across her face when she saw me. "You okay, honey?" she asked gently, her eyes searching mine. I nodded, though I could feel the cracks in my voice. "Yeah. I just need to see Laya." Mom led me upstairs to Lila's room, where my daughter sat on her bed, drawing. She looked up when she saw me, her bright eyes lighting up with excitement. "Mom," she exclaimed, running over to me and throwing her arms around my waist. I hugged her tightly, the comfort of her embrace almost breaking me. I had been hiding from the truth for so long, keeping her away from the one person I should have trusted with everything, Phil. And now, I wondered if I had ruined everything. Laya looked up at me, her innocent eyes full of love and trust. "Mom, when are you and Phil going to come over and play with me again?" Her question cut through me like a knife. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what was going to happen next. As I sat on the bed with her, my thoughts spiraled. Could I fix things with Phil? Could he ever forgive me for keeping Lila a secret from him? And if he did, would things ever be the same again? My mother's house. Phil sat in his car, the engine idling but his mind racing. He had been sitting there for what felt like an eternity, torn between wanting to see Lila and wanting to walk away, to leave this all behind. The pain in his eyes was evident even from the window, his face shadowed by the internal conflict that raged within him. He had loved me, loved the idea of our family, and now, it all felt like a lie. But Lila wasn't just a lie. She was his daughter too, no matter how much he wanted to ignore that fact. Was he ready to meet her? Was he ready to face the truth, to see the child he had unknowingly been part of creating all those years ago? Phil's hand rested on the door handle, but he didn't move. He stayed there, in the stillness of the night, wondering if he should walk away from it all, or step inside and confront the life he never knew he had. It felt like hours before I heard the knock. My heart skipped a beat as I stood by the door, unsure of what to expect. I had never imagined that the moment Phil would step back into my life like this, it would feel so fragile, so uncertain. The truth had torn us apart, but here he was, standing on the other side of the door, ready to face what had been hidden for so long. I opened it slowly, my eyes meeting his. He looked different, tired, yes, but there was a certain softness to him now, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. His eyes weren't filled with anger or distrust anymore. They were just open. Maya, he said softly, almost as if testing the name on his lips. I nodded, unable to find the right words. But I didn't need to. Phil stepped past me, his gaze immediately going to Lila, who stood in the doorway of the living room, staring up at him with wide eyes. It was an odd moment, the first time they saw each other. Lila's innocence, her warmth, her quiet curiosity, made Phil freeze. There was no anger in her eyes, no accusation, only a shy smile that made him hesitate. He crouched down slowly, not sure how to approach, his hand lingering in the air before he offered it to her. "Hi, Lila," he said, his voice shaking just slightly. "I'm Phil. I'm your mom's husband." Lila studied him for a moment, her tiny hand reaching out to shake his, a soft giggle escaping her lips. "You're my mommy's friend, right?" she asked, still not fully understanding, but trusting nonetheless. Phil smiled, a genuine, broken smile, and nodded. "Yeah, I guess I am." The tension in the room melted a little, but there was still a heavy silence between me and Phil. He stood, turning toward me as Lila went back to her drawing, still blissfully unaware of the storm that had just passed through our lives. Phil and I stood in the kitchen, the weight of the past few days pressing down on both of us. He didn't speak at first, his fingers tracing the edge of the counter, as though he was collecting his thoughts. "I should have known," he began quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I should have known that you were keeping something from me. But I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe everything was fine between us, that you and me, we were enough." I swallowed hard, my heart aching for him, for us. "Phil," I started, my voice trembling, "I never meant for you to feel this way. I never wanted to hurt you. But I was so afraid. I was so afraid of losing you." Phil turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. "Afraid of losing me," he repeated, almost incredulously. "Maya, you were hiding a whole child. A daughter I didn't even know existed. You kept her from me, from us. How could I not feel betrayed?" "I know," I said softly, the weight of the admission sinking in. "I know. I was wrong. But it wasn't because I didn't trust you. It was because I was scared. Scared of what would happen if I told you the truth. Scared of what you'd think of me, of what we might lose." Phil looked down, running a hand through his hair in frustration. It's not just the secret. It's the fact that you couldn't trust me enough to tell me. I thought we were supposed to be partners. But you kept so much from me, Maya. And I don't know how to fix that. I stepped closer, taking a deep breath. We can fix it. But only if we're honest with each other from now on. No more hiding. No more secrets. I can't promise it won't be hard, but I need you to trust me again. Phil met my eyes, and for a moment, everything felt like it was on the verge of breaking. But then he spoke, his voice low, steady. I want to believe you. I do. But we're going to have to work at this, Maya. We're going to have to rebuild what we've lost. One step at a time. I nodded, tears threatening to spill. I'm ready. I don't want to lose you, Phil. I never did. The room was silent for a while, and I could feel the air around us shift. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fixed. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I had a glimmer of hope. We weren't at the end of the road yet, but maybe, just maybe, we were starting to walk down a new path together. Phil's voice broke through the quiet, his words surprising me. How about, next weekend, we all go visit Lila together? You, me, and her. I think I need to get to know her. To get to know us. The way things should have been all along. I couldn't help the tear that slid down my cheek, though this time it wasn't from pain. It was from relief. Phil, are you sure? I asked, my voice shaky. He smiled, his gaze softening. Yeah. I think it's time. As I watched Phil, his eyes filled with uncertainty and hope, I couldn't help but wonder about the road ahead. Could we really rebuild what we had? Could we move past the lies, the secrets, the betrayals? Maybe love really could conquer all. If we let it. I looked at Phil, a cautious hope blooming in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, we could start over, together. And as we stood there, the weight of the past slowly lifting, I whispered to myself, perhaps this is the beginning of something new. If you enjoyed Maya and Phil's journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that explore love, trust, and second chances. Have you ever faced a situation where honesty could make or break a relationship? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. Until next time, remember, love is a journey, not a destination. See you in the next story.